as I watched it, it was interesting. He gave a quiz, as he normally does, and the questions were based on covenant theology. Did Martin Luther teach on covenant theology? Did John Calvin and others? So as I was listening to it, I noted that the first 13 minutes of the lesson was on covenant theology. And if you watch or remember last week's lesson, I never used that term.
Right.
Okay? I never used covenant theology, covenant of grace, covenant of works, covenant of redemption. Those are some of the terms that are in that covenant theology's line of thinking. So as I looked at that, I noticed that the pillars that covenant theology is based on, I don't agree with that. I never taught on that last week. And also interesting, as Pastor Cliff focused on the word covenant, he went down the kind of explanation of we don't study the word kind of based on word study of the word, the root of it, the etymology of it, but instead we study it based on usage and the context that it's used. So with that, he gave several definitions. One was covenant is an agreement requiring a blood sacrifice. And that's actually, he quoted it from covenant theology. So I kind of tossed that aside. But then at about the 21st minute mark, he said covenant is a promise from God. That's a general term definition. Then he said from the Master's Seminary that covenant is a legally binding obligation. It's pretty good definition as well. So as I was going through the covenants last week, the first two were the ones that were not in line with that. The word covenant is not in the Bible, which is the one in Eden and the Adam. And how I viewed those two was, when I looked at covenants, is the covenant applied to all of mankind or all of Israel? And if it's not, then I would think that any of those agreements, smaller covenants, are lesser, and I didn't include that in the list. So that's kind of how I looked through my grid of which covenants I included. And that's why I included the one in Eden, which gave us what it was God's plan. What is God's plan for man? And then Adam, which precedes a whole number of promises that God gave, including, of course, the seed that's promised in Genesis 3:15. So just wanted to kind of finish off that topic. So this past week, I've been studying the Jewish wedding, and boy, is there a lot to study. Have any one of you attended a Jewish wedding? So Patrick and Rob, was it long? Was there like a lot of things? It was very long. Yeah. And same for you, Patrick?
Yeah, I couldn't follow.
Yeah. So I looked up the Jewish wedding, and I think I looked through at least half a dozen sources. And there's a lot of different traditions within, or variants within one. But on the board here is a typical Jewish wedding. So if you are invited to one, prepare for a very long day. Right? So this is the word for Jewish wedding. It starts with a pre-wedding, a couple events. This is a pre-wedding reception. This is the veiling of the bride. And this is the canopy, the marriage canopy. There's a procession, the actual marriage ceremony itself. This is a marriage contract. This is the actual ceremony. And these are the 7 blessings. Breaking the glass, you probably heard that. Then there's another thing called a Yuchid ceremony. And then finally is the reception. So you survive through all that, then comes the food, okay, and the dancing and so forth. So I'm going to explain those, and I'll put some English terms to those. Yes, Jacob?
Is this sort of modern, or would we have expected this back in ancient times as well?
This is modern.
Okay, gotcha.
In fact, the title slide here, I'm going to talk about a Jewish wedding of today. And this is background to understand the ancient Jewish marriage custom, because a lot of this was based on that. And then knowing the ancient Jewish marriage custom will help us to understand that that's an illustration of a pre-tribulational, premillennial rapture. Okay? So there's a lot of information, but it all ties together. And as I go through today on this material, you'll probably be amazed at how much scripture is used in today's Jewish wedding. It is so much. Okay? So here we go. And one of the reasons why I want to explore this topic is because marriage language is used a lot in the Bible, especially the Old Testament, on how some of the people got married, as well as just the language of how the Lord describes his relationship with the church in Ephesians 5. So these are some passages. Mark 2:19-20 talks about the bridegroom will be taken away, so forth. 2 Corinthians 11:2 says, "For I feel a divine jealousy for you." And then Paul saying, "Since I betrothed you to one husband." Interesting terms, right? To present you as a pure virgin to Christ. And then, of course, Ephesians 5 has this passage with the wife and the husband, where it's talking about the relationship with how they ought to be to each other as to how Christ to the church, and so forth. So there's a lot of marriage language within the Bible. And in the ancient Jewish marriage custom, I just wanted to give you this as something to put in the back of your mind. This is the framework that is going to be used to describe how that goes. And now, using this, you can see as we go to the current day. So, in the ancient Jewish custom, there's basically two stages. One is called the condition, and this is where, through this first stage, it binds the bride and the groom together as husband and wife. They have a marriage contract called the ketubah. And so in the Jewish day, ancient Jewish day, once they finish this first stage, they are married. They are legally married. Okay? They haven't had their wedding yet, but they're legally married. So this is kind of when you read the story of Mary and Joseph, that they're married legally, but they haven't really consummated and so forth. But they are married, so that's why he had to protect her and do other things because she was with child, right? So in the ancient Jewish wedding, you have this first half, and then there's a consecration period of the bride, a waiting period. So there's a time between the first stage, even though they're legally married, to the second stage where they have the ceremony. So this waiting period is typically 1 year. That's very typical. That's how long it is. And then the second stage, called the Nisun, is the groom comes to catch away the bride. And what does he do? He catches away the bride, brings her to his father's house, and then they have a 7-day feast to celebrate. And then the marriage supper occurs at the end of that 7th day. Okay? So this is the ancient marriage custom, and I'm going to go into that probably in the next 2 classes to just really go through. There's so much detail within this. All right, so I found some of these on the internet where there's an order of ceremony, and it comes in different forms. And these terms, the ketubahs, the contract, they go to this canopy, the Hoopa. Then there's breaking of the glass and so forth. So that's just a typical invite. Here's a fancier one. And there's 8 aspects to a guide. It says a guide to a Jewish wedding. So I try to blow these up a little bit. So these are some of the terms that you see on the board. Ketubah is the contract. And then there's the veiling, the betrothal, giving of the ring, and so forth. So I want to get into that. Okay, so within this, there's some pre-wedding preparations that the bride and groom does. So one is called the medva, and what that is the bride takes her a ritual bath the day before the wedding. This immersion signifies a rebirth, reflecting on the upcoming change in the personal status. So there's a cleansing, a washing, a ritual bath. And if you remember the story in John 2, where there's a lot of water that was turned into wine, there's tons and tons of these big jars of water, and part of it is for ritual bath and other washings. Typically, there's a week of separation that happens before the wedding. So a lot of times it depends on the best man and other helpers to kind of coordinate between the two. They also fast. That's very typical. They fast on the wedding day. This is, they consider this a personal Yom Kippur, where they try to, they fast from basically dawn until the completion of the marriage, and it is their way to have a day of atonement, be cleansed for their sins before they enter into the ceremony. So that's some of the preparations before the wedding. And then there's a reception that happens, and very often in these weddings, the men and the women are in separate rooms or separate areas. So in the reception, there's one for the women and one for the men in the pre-wedding. Okay? So in this pre-wedding reception, that's called the Kabbalah Panem. So what happens is the women go to the lady's side and would give her best wishes, words of encouragement, and things like that to share with her. For the guys, it's different. The guys, when they come, the guy, the groom, he sits in this chair called a tush, and the guys, when they go, they actually go and the groom has to give a scholarly talk from the Torah. It's like, oh boy, that's okay. And then the guy is supposed to razz him, are you teaching this right, kind of thing, kind of in jest. But this is his day to teach them. And but all in all, because they fast, they're kind of see this as really they're highly regarded there, that they're treated like royalty. And you'll see this, they'll sit in these kind of royalty type chairs throughout the day. In some instances, they also, at this pre-wedding reception, sign a engagement contract. If there's a contract about the engagement and what are some of the terms. So that's one. And then next is the veiling the bride. So this veiling the bride is a very cherished and meaningful tradition. And if they haven't seen each other for a week, this is the first time they see each other. So they see each other, and the man would go there and put the veil over the bride's face. So the word there means to veil, that deacon, And the tradition is traced back to Genesis 29. It traces back to the story of Jacob and Rachel. If you remember that. So Jacob, in Genesis 29, Jacob falls in love with Rachel and agrees to work for her father Laban for 7 years, okay, in order to marry her. On the wedding day, Laban deceives Jacob and brought Rachel's older sister Leah to him. Okay. So Jacob unknowingly marries her instead. Sometimes you wonder how it happens. They haven't seen each other for that time, and it's probably at night. It's at Laban's area with the animals and stuff. So it's probably outside. It's dark, and typically this should not be in Laban's area. It should be in Jacob's father's place, but he's working way out over there. Okay, so he's kind of at a disadvantage. And I just want to just make a note on, this is interesting, just as a lot of the commentators kind of make a joke of this, but it's actually a difficult term to interpret. It's in Genesis 29:17 that there's a phrase about Leah's eyes. So Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful in form and appearance. That's the verse in ESV. So what does eyes being weak mean? Okay. And so many translations use weak. The second most used is tender-eyed. She was tender-eyed. There's one that says delicate. The Holman Christian Standard Bible says ordinary eyes, and the New American Bible says she had dull eyes. And so what's going on is that the commentators were trying to be nice in the way to use the word. So the tender-eyed is like dull, bleared eyes, probably suffer from some kind of eye disease, and this is regarded in the East as a great defect. So it probably made her eyes red, so she was, as the commentators say, she was not so agreeable to look at. And so this is where is the big shock to Jacob. And this is in a way a lesson for him, because he did the switch earlier in his life with the birthright. So with that, what the emphasis on this veil is not to be interested in the bride's external beauty, which fades with time, but rather in her inner beauty. That's the lesson there. So she has this veil for the duration all the way up to the marriage ceremony. So that's a pretty long time. Okay. There are a lot of other lessons to be learned, but definitely it's not from the Jacob in Genesis 29. There's other lessons there. Okay, but this is how the tradition goes. So then there's this the chupa, or the hoopa with the C silent. Sometimes there's two P's in the spelling. It's the marriage canopy, and this is kind of a recreation of what would happen in Abraham's day, whereas out in the open. Dates back to the 10th dwelling days, and they're held outdoors, and this is to create a kind of a sanctified space. The hoopa is intended to be symbolic of the couple's new home, open on all sides to welcome family and friends. Okay, and so there's a lot of imagery with the openness, the open skies, and it's kind of recalls God's blessing to Abraham that his descendants are as numerous as the stars. So it's that kind of environment. And one tradition among many of these ceremonies is that they don't wear any jewelry there when they go to the hoopa, and the idea is that the commitment is to each other as they are, without any material possessions. So not much jewelry there. All right, next is the procession. So the groom goes over to the bridal reception room, because they were in separate reception rooms, and the groom goes to the bridal reception room and then veils her, and then he starts to proceed down toward the Hoopa, toward the marriage canopy. So that's kind of how it goes, and then the bride and groom goes. And as the parties are going there, during this time when the groom puts the veil over the bride, it's actually a very emotional, significant moment, because this is now they're preparing to go into the sacred union of marriage. Okay. So sometimes they wear a white garment called a kittle, or even a prayer shawl. So there's a lot of preparation as to what you wear, what you do, and the details are just a lot within a Jewish wedding. Okay, so the groom is there, and then the bride comes. So when the bride comes to the groom, she walks around in circles, him 7 times. Okay, so this is called the bride's 7 circles. So once she arrives at the Hoopa, this symbolizes a commitment of building a new world together. Sometimes it's 3, sometimes it's 7, and when they do 7, it's like the 7 days of creation, and then after she does the circle, she steps in, so she's within the circle with him to the exclusion of everybody else. It's just those 2. So this pulling in creation is going to be an aspect that will be in the ancient Jewish wedding that we'll look at next time. All right, so after all that, this is the preliminary activity. Now we're going to get to the actual ceremony. Okay, in the actual ceremony, the condition is translated as betrothal, but this ceremony, as I mentioned earlier, once they finish this, they are now legally husband and wife, right here. So, and then in the Torah, there's 3 aspects, 3 ways that you can betroth a woman. One is by a money transaction, or giving a woman some either money or objects of value. And then there's also a document, a marriage document. And then the third is consummation, which the rabbis say that that's punishable offense. So that even though it's in the Torah, that's not what they'll allow. And then when they do this marriage ceremony in this part, you got to have 2 witnesses for that. Typically, it's a most common betroth is by the means of a money transaction. Okay, so this is just for the contract, not the wedding. So the wedding ring is later, and then when they give something of value, if you think back at Jacob and Laban, what did he give of value? It was 7 years of service. That was the value. That's what he gave. And then it turns out the second wife was also 7 more years of service. So it doesn't have to be money in that sense. All right. Okay, so now the marriage is now performed, this part over a cup of wine. The rabbi holds a cup, recites the blessing over wine, and then the betrothal blessing. So the groom and bride sip from the cup, and the groom now takes the wedding ring in his hand in the clear view of 2 witnesses, and this is what he declares to the bride. Behold, by this ring you are consecrated to me as my wife, according to the law of Moses and Israel. So that's his vow. That's what he says. He places the ring over her finger, and then at this moment, the couple is fully married. Okay. Now next is So within the Jewish marriage, there's a lot of spiritual aspect, biblical aspect, but there's also legal aspect. Okay, and so they have this contract. So after the groom places the ring on the bride's finger, this ketubah, the marriage contract, is read aloud to everybody to hear. So it's a legal and moral commitment as well, right? Yeah. And
I noticed that the ring's on the right.
On the forefinger.
I'm not sure.
The last slide, it was right. Yes, it's the forefinger.
Oh.
Go forward, yeah.
Which one?
Go back. Yeah, it's the second. No.
Oh.
No.
Come on.
Right there. Oh, second to the last. The very
The ring
on the forefinger of the brass, right?
Oh, okay. Yeah, those are the notes I took. It's like, wow, it's, I don't know why they say that. Good catch. I'm not sure. So with this contract, what they're doing is they read it out loud, and this commitment, it's really interesting that when they read this contract, it spells out what is the groom's principal obligations to his wife. So everybody knows this is what he's supposed to do for her in this community. Okay. Food, shelter, clothing, affection, and other obligations. So the document's signed before two witnesses, and then the groom accepts these obligations with a legal consent. So there's a lot of legal aspect. And then this is now a legally binding agreement. Not only is it an agreement, it's interesting, it's the property of the bride. So it's kind of like her protection that she's got this signed, right? So after this whole contract is read out loud, it's handed over to the groom, whoever read it, who then hands it over to the bride. So she has a copy. Okay. So now the betrothal is complete. There's a picture of her holding one. And I think in the old days, there's 3 copies. One for the groom, one for the bride, and one for the rabbi for the records. Okay, and they're sealed. All right, so that first half of this process is complete. They're legally married. And then now they have this this final stage of the marriage ceremony. And they started off with saying 7 blessings. So these 7 blessings consist of a praise to God, pray for peace in Jerusalem, good wishes, and so forth. And sometimes the parents would wrap the couple in a prayer shawl together, binding them together. And then comes the breaking the glass. So this shattering the glass, they put a glass in a like a napkin or something, and then the groom smashes it with his right foot. Okay. So actually, it's a reminder. It's probably the most iconic moment in the Jewish wedding. Is the smashing of the glass, wrapped in a large cloth napkin, placed under the foot of the groom, stomps on it. So the shattering of the glass here reminds them, even at the height of personal joy, they don't ever forget what happened in Jerusalem, the destruction of the Jerusalem temple. So that's what it means. And sometimes they recite Psalm 137, which is the subtitle of Psalm 137 in my Bible says, an experience of the captivity. And in verse 5 it says, if I forget you, O Jerusalem. So they remember the captivity and all that happened there. And as the glass is shattered, it's an official signal to shout. So they shout this phrase. I'm not going to butcher it, so I'm not going to say it. But it means,
Mazel tov.
Mazel tov. Okay. It literally means good fortune. Like congratulations. So this is the conclusion of the ceremony. So when they do that, then you can get ready to party and to eat. So means good fortune. So what happens immediately after the smashing of the glass in this marriage canopy, very public, the bride and groom goes to an adjacent room, goes to this room called the Yishid. And so this room, they spend a few moments alone in this room. There's no in-laws, no guests, no photographer. It is a time for the bride and groom to share some private moments. You know, maybe stare each other in the face or something. In days of old, the bride and groom would retreat to a nearby tent to consummate the marriage. So this is kind of, they try to symbolize, and that's a tent, but in other places it's actually in the father's house. There's another room where then the party's at another area. So they're totally separate. So the point here is that while you're surrounded by a crowd that's just clamoring and showering you with love and attention, the important lesson is the couple should never forget to just find private time for each other in the midst of that. So this is kind of a reminder, so that never allow the hustle and bustle of life to completely engulf you. Sometimes you just get caught up in that. So, and also in this room, and pragmatically this is when the couple traditionally breaks their fast. They can finally eat something, right? All right, next is the wedding reception. I show some pictures here. First is the blessing of the challah, which is this big loaf of bread. Yeah, so that's where the reception starts, and then there's a wedding feast. So where they have celebratory meal, and you always find chicken and fish. You might find a sweet rice pudding with coconut milk and so forth, but you probably will not find pork or shellfish. All right. And it's interesting, I was reading some notes. It says, participating in a wedding feast and gladdening the hearts of the bride and groom on this special day is a great mitzvah. And I was looking up the word mitzvah means commandment. You're commanded to do that. So you better participate, right? So you are to, it is expected and required for the guests to bring joy to the groom and bride on their wedding day. So bring some energy. And a lot of music and a lot of dancing. So when the bride and groom emerges from that secluded room, then they're greeted with music, singing, and dancing. And usually the men are dancing with the groom and the woman dancing with the bride. Usually it's like in circles and stuff like that, so they keep that, and later they might have it together. Okay, again, it's kind of interesting, it's separated like that. And one of the dances is called the hora. Sometimes they spell it ending with an H as well. It's a chair dance. So the picture is there where the bride and groom each are sitting in a chair and they're hoisted up. And then within each circle, then they would celebrate that way. It's like, you gotta have I gotta have a number of strong men. So they circle the couple. A lot of times when they circle the couple, they're linking arms or holding hands as they do that. Okay, so this is all part of that.
Let's get the one.
Yeah, those are the, they have a lot of wine to bless each portion. And so to bless the bread, then they have wine. There's wine like in a lot of steps.
Like an overflowing of blessings without that means.
Yeah, that picture is like overflowing, and they have several cups that they use. I'll explain some of the cups in the next slide. Yeah, so, all right. One more slide on this. So after all that, there's something called grace after meals. This is the last of the rituals of the day. So this thing called grace after meals, the wedding meal is followed by this, and they recite this, the 7 blessings, what they call it, the Shavab or Pochat, the same 7 blessings that were recited under the canopy. So they recite this, and usually the guests recite that as well. They have booklets. So they recite 7. After the first 6, the final one is when they have the wine. Each one in the first stage glass, or one in the second stage glass. They put it together, new life together, and the bride and groom drinks from that in one cup. So this is how this beautiful wedding is concluded in that way. So I kind of go through all this, and you can see that it's a lot. You can see that it's a lot of respect for God, of course, and then the parents, creation, and then they have a lot of family as the gathering. They want to involve their guests, a lot of hospitality. There's just a lot of wonderful aspects within the Jewish wedding. Okay. So, as I mentioned in the beginning of this lesson, these verses really talk about how Christ and the church are like a marriage. Okay, and then if you think about the church, one of the aspects of a Jewish wedding is the father would actually be the one that would select or get the bride for the son, right? So if you think about the story of Isaac, so what did Abraham do? Abraham told one of his servants to go to a town to find a wife that's suitable for his son Isaac. Sometimes it's that. Sometimes it's the man would see somebody in the marketplace, and then he would ask his father, "Get her for me." Right? So if you think about the story of Samson, that's what happened. Samson sees Delilah, but then Samson asks his father to please get her for me. So those are ways, but it's the father that does the getting to, and what that is to not only meet her, but also that meet her father, so that the families would know each other before that would be. And so I'll go more into that next time, but basically the relationship with the church and Christ is that we are the called out ones, ecclesia. So Matthew 16:18 says that Jesus is talking, "And I will tell you that you are Peter, on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it." So church is the strong number 1577. It means people called out from the world and to God. That's ecclesia. And in the verse Matthew 16:18 it says, "I will." So that's future tense. So Jesus is building this assembly of, let's say, people that have never existed before, because it's future tense, right? It's a new group of people. So this group of people, the ecclesia, cannot be Israel. Israel's already been here. It already exists. It cannot be Old Testament saints or any group that God had before. So this is where the church is, this new assembly. This is what's being built. So Acts 2:47 talks about the church, the numbers added, like 3,000 has been added, and so forth. So this is the new entity, is the church. And Christ in Matthew 16:18 says, "I'm going to build my called out ones as this group." All right. So here, this is, to give you a preview, this is the steps of the ancient Jewish wedding. Okay, the condition is the betrothal period. So this is going to be similar to the current one, but one is the selection of the bride, as I mentioned a couple examples of Isaac and Samson. And then number 2 is the meeting of the marriage, where the meeting of each side meets together. And what do? Is they talk about the bride price. what is the dowry? What is the bride price that the man's side is going to pay for the lady? Okay. And part of it is to offset that whatever she was doing before, she would not be able to help her own family within any income or things like that. And also she has to get ready. So a lot of the price comes with having her to be ready to be his bride. Okay. So that has to be negotiated. The bride price agreement. And then as it's today, there's a signing of the marriage contract. The wedding cup, they're now legally married. And then, interesting, after that, gifts are given. They're given like to extended families and other, but gifts are given. So the groom side not only has the bride price, but also has gifts. So there's two separate things that are given. And I'll have passages that will support that. And then once that is done, the bride is accepted into the family. So this is the legally married part. Okay. And a question for you to think about next week is, if you think about the Christ and the church, what was the bride price? And what were the gifts? Okay, think about that. Okay. I'll type it up in the email as well, some things. But there's just a lot of things for your mind to think about. All right, well, what's the next step after all this? Now that the bride's accepted a family, everything's agreed upon, this contract is signed, well, then there's this waiting period. Typically, it's 1 year, but it's a waiting period. Okay. And there's a lot of things that are happening during this waiting period, and we'll get into that. After that comes catching away of the bride. So they're married, they're legally married, but now after this whole waiting period, the groom will come to catch away the bride. So the bride then meets the groom. After they're together, then there's wedding vows and the ceremony. They drink the marriage cup. The groom and bride consummates the marriage in the Hoopa. In the ancient days, there's a presentation of the token of virginity as an important matter to them. And then there's a marriage supper at the end of the wedding. Not at the beginning or middle, but it's toward the end. So this is where this has significance. This is a 7-day event, and it happens on the last day. This helps us to correlate what is the marriage supper of the Lamb, and when is that with respect to where we are, and how does that fit in the end times timeline? Okay, end of the day. Let's see. Since I have a moment, I want to share with you a word study on harpazo. Kind of relates to when I've been careful in saying the groom is taking the bride and is catching the bride, right? So harpazo is the word for that in some of your translations are raptured or taken up. And the Greek word is harpazo. And if you look up this word, it's strong number 726, there's actually several meanings that have been used, interpreted, okay? Or there's several translations, I'm sorry. So one of them is, in the definitions, is to seize. You seize somebody, you catch up, you catch them up, you snatch them away. So you hear these terms, and sometimes I find, whether it's commentators or whether it's preachers or others, is that they might use it interchangeably. Like, it's like, well, when rapture comes, believers are going to be snatched away. Like all of a sudden, they're going to be taken up. And while that is true in one sense, I find that catching away is a lot better term for it. And let me explain why. So, because the definitions say catch, seize, take by force. We're taken by force in a sense, but it's not violently negative to us. So that's why I kind of don't like using that term for the rapture passages. So what I did was I looked up the usage of this word, harpazo, and it's used, I think, 16 times. So what I did was I just looked up within that. Let's see, let me explain the beginning. It says, there's these various verb tense, and so this in the top part. And then I started looking at passages where they use it. This is where I was thinking about word study, where we need to look at the context and how it's used. So if you look at to seize or carry off by force, that's in these passages here. To seize or claim one eagerly. So I was thinking the kingdom of heaven, suffering violence, and so forth. And so I'm thinking, wow, that's, I don't know if that's what we're thinking about in the Christians being raptured. So the snatching away, Matthew 13:19 says, snatch away what has been sown. So like the parable, the sowing the seeds, and then you snatch away. Okay. I don't picture ourselves being snatched away like a seed on the ground. So that's why I would not want to use that translation for us. John 10:28 says, no one can snatch him out of my hand. That's kind of like a negative thing of, well, I'm secure, but so no one can snatch it away. But that's kind of not what the rapture is describing. So as you read these, it just doesn't make kind of a sense to use snatching away as a way of describing rapture. So, the last portion of the slide, catch away, this word rapture that is in 1 Thessalonians 4:17, the very last line, it's the same word that's used for the Apostle Paul when he got caught up to the third heavens. Okay. It's the same word that's used when Philip got caught up in the road to Emmaus. So I like using catching away because we actually want to catch them. Christ wants to catch us in his loving arms to bring us to him rather than being snatched away like something negative or something forceful. So that's kind of how I looked at it, and so I just want to share that with you. All right.
Peter?
Yes. Yeah, Gary.
It could be seen maybe another way, right? Like, if I had a child who was on the edge of a subway thing, and was teetering over it, I'm going to snatch him away from that danger. Mm-hmm. And I can also see how Christ would snatch us away from this evil world.
Yeah. Yeah. So in this one, so in Jude 1:23, where it says snatching away, it's like save others by snatching them out of the fire, be like that. And the reason why I like using catching away is because it is something that we're not in danger because we're already in Christ. So this is more of a hopeful thing that we're going to be catched away to go to meet with Christ in heaven. So that's why I kind of look at the positive aspect of I feel that all passages about the rapture is related to hope. It's a blessed hope that we have. So that's why I lean toward not wanting to use anything negative when I'm trying to describe the rapture, trying to understand it from that way. And then just dig a little bit deeper with the word usage and try to make sure that makes sense too. Okay, so. Yeah, so I'm really looking forward to the next two lessons, which will be 2 weeks away. Next week is Mother's Day, next Sunday. So, And the ancient Jewish wedding has so many aspects to it that just kind of blew me away when I studied it. So here's a picture. Okay. So this is what I mean by carrying away. So this is the bride carried away by the groomsmen, or so to speak. The groom is not here. The groom is not in here. The groom is actually farther away and actually in his father's house. So this picture shows a lot of things, because the bride is carried away, and this guy is blowing a horn, the shofar. So this is where the trumpets sound, things like that, and it's a procession, and the groom is not here because the groom is waiting at the father's house. Okay, so if you start putting together passages in your mind as to what John 14 talks about and things like that, so this is where we get so much richness from the marriage language that's throughout the Bible. So this is going to be neat to share with you next time. All right, well, let me close in a word of prayer. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for you, and we thank you for that. In eternity past, you've have chosen us, and we're for the chosen. We've been predestined to be not only children of God, but be heirs of God, and be with you forever. And God, we are so thankful for your grace and mercy, and thankful for this promise of spending eternity with you as we put our faith in you. And we thank you for this picture of a Jewish wedding and the customs that go with it, and how you really sprinkle throughout the whole Bible this marriage language that speaks of the bride of Christ and how we're going to dine with you someday. So God, we thank you for all this, and may you continue to bless us on this Lord's Day. In Jesus' name, amen.